It all started right here 25 years ago at Naperville Central High School. I was 25, John was 23, my wife Sue was, not going to fall for that one. She was awesome, that's what she was. All I remember is we were all so young, we were just trying to do everything we possibly could to seem credible to anybody that would show up. But we did, we started in the cafeteria right here at Naperville Central High School. I'd love to take you in there, but they've actually remodeled a couple different times so it looks totally different. But it is etched in my mind. Because I remember having this reoccurring dream before the first service that I walked down to the stage there in the cafeteria. I'm getting ready to deliver my talk, first time, and I look out in the audience and there's like 3 people there. And one of them is my wife, Sue. So I'm thinking, what do I do? And I run backstage, I find John, and I say, hey, John, go out there and tell him that we're going to start next week. That was my big plan. Well, despite being nervous and anxious, I'm just telling you, God has been so good to us over the years. And even that first weekend, we didn't know if we'd have 25, 50, 100 people show up. We had 465 people that packed that cafeteria. Most of those people are people who are far from God. He's been so good to us. Well, a lot's changed since that first weekend on March 5th of 1989. I get to wear jeans. I don't have to wear a suit when I teach anymore. We've changed the music quite a bit. In addition to that, though, we've also gone from 1 location to 14 locations. When you think about New Thing, we have more than 150 churches globally that are a part of this reproducing movement. As a church, we're a lot more diverse church, city and suburbs. And there's been thousands of people that have found their way back to God. And you know what? That's the one thing that has not changed. And that's our mission. Helping people find their way back to God. It feels like it's stronger than ever before. I'll tell you what, John's waiting for us inside. Let's go in the little theater and join him right now. Well, eventually we moved out of the cafeteria and moved right into here. This is Naperville Central's little theater. And at one point, we had 3 Sunday services right here every weekend. So here we are, on the verge of Community's 25th anniversary. And John and I, we just really want to take the opportunity to talk to the whole church, every location, city and suburbs, all at one time. Now, for the last few weeks, we've been in a great series, and I've really loved this series, The Story of Everything. And it's about how what we believe, it's not just a series of kind of theological propositions, but it's a story. I mean, it's a great story. It's a true story. And it's a story of everything. And the church that we're all a part of, community, we're a part of that story of everything.
Yeah, Dave, like every good story, the story of everything has a main character. And the main character's Hebrew name is actually Elohim. Somebody say Elohim.
Elohim.
Very good. And Elohim is actually a plural noun indicating that God is 3 in 1. And has existed since the beginning of time in a community of grace. God the Father, God the Spirit, God the Son. And our God had a dream of how the world would be. Perfect relationship between God and man and between all people. That's how He made the world, and that's how He wanted it to always be. But this story also has a villain.
Boo.
Right, and this villain is?
Sin.
That's right, sin. And we learned that sin is not simply about breaking the rules. It's really about a break in relationships with each other and with God. Then the most peculiar thing happened in the story. The author of the story wrote himself into the story. God Himself makes an appearance in the story of everything and shows up as a man, as Jesus. And He came to be with us. He came because He is for us. And He came to show us what is ahead of us. And then when Jesus left to go back to the Father, the Holy Spirit remained and is now available to come to life inside of anyone who chooses to follow Jesus. And the Holy Spirit is a power for me and a power for we. He gives us the power to be both individually and collectively as a church what we could never, ever be on our own. And when His Spirit comes to life inside of us as a church, we have the power to reach out, to reproduce, and to truly restore God's original dream for all people everywhere.
When I think about our church as a part of the story of everything, I remember a few years ago, I was in Greece with a select group of church leaders. And this was a really special group. And they'd worked together for about 5 years doing everything they could to try to accelerate church planting efforts in that part of the world. And actually, the results were amazing. They started more than 1,000 churches.
Yeah,
in Europe.
Dave, time out. You kind of got me stuck with you being in Greece with a select group of leaders, because
Why?
if I recall correctly, while you were in Greece with a select group of leaders, I was in Siberia with a select group of leaders. I really was. I was actually in Siberia. We went there. And if we think it's cold here, one of the guys that was at that gathering in Siberia was from a town called Norilsk, Norilsk. They have 6 weeks every winter where they actually see no sunlight at all. The average high temperature in January is minus 11. I actually keep that city on my weather app just so I don't feel so bad about our winter. So yeah, Dave's in Greece, I'm in Siberia. Kind of explains a lot, doesn't it?
Are you done?
No, I could go on if you want me to.
A little younger brother anger there.
There's a lot more where that came from.
All right, so anyway, somebody had to do it. I did it. You're in Siberia. I'm in Greece. Back to the story. It was the last session before I left. They asked if they could pray and prophesy over me. And I was kind of used to the pray part, not the prophesy part. But I'm kind of up for it, so I'm like, sure. So they start praying over me. And I don't know how else to say it, except it was just powerful. It was just one of those moments where you knew, God's Spirit was kind of there. And when they finished up praying for me, one of the guys said he had a prophecy for me, and also our church. And when someone prophesies over you, I don't know. What do you expect?
I really have no idea what to expect.
Well, that's kind of the way I was. I had no idea what to expect either. But what he did is he started reading Scripture. So I'm going, okay, that's legit, reading the Bible.
Yep, when in doubt, read the Bible.
That's what he did. And he read this vision from the prophet Ezekiel, chapter 47. And the guy who had this prophecy was from London, so I remember he read it real slow. I think he read it real slow so I could make sure I understood what he was reading. But he also had this great English accent, which made it
always makes it more dramatic,
more interesting too.
more smart.
Right. I'll tell you what, why don't you mind just reading that for us, Ezekiel?
Yes, Dave, I just actually happen to have this right here. I'd be
Very
glad
nice.
to read that. And
Ezekiel
here's the vision from
47.
Ezekiel chapter 47, okay? And listen closely, it's just a beautiful picture. I saw water coming out from under the threshold of the temple, and the water was trickling. As the man, and this man is like an angel guiding his dream or this vision, as the man went eastward with a measuring line in his hand, he measured off 1,000 cubits and then led me through water that was ankle deep. He measured off another 1,000 cubits and led me through water that was knee deep. He measured off another 1,000 and led me through water that was up to the waist. He measured off another 1,000, but now it was a river that I could not cross because the water had risen and was deep enough to swim in, a river that no one could cross. Then he led me back to the bank of the river. When I arrived there, I saw a great number of trees on each side of the river. He said to me, "This water flows toward the eastern region and goes down into the Arabah where it enters the Dead Sea. When it empties into the sea, the salty water there becomes fresh. Swarms of living creatures will live wherever the river flows. There will be large numbers of fish because this water flows there and makes the salt water fresh. So where the river flows, everything will live."
Now, when that guy read this, I couldn't help but think, of course, of our church. And a few things stood out to me. And the first thing was this vision was all about water. And of course, water is this really amazing thing. When we're born, we're 80% water. And a person can't even live 3 days without water, they'll die. So immediately there's this huge connection between water and life. And in Ezekiel's vision, the water is flowing from and out of the temple. And I couldn't help but think about our different locations when I pictured the temple. And what's weird here was that instead of the water flowing kind of like to the temple or to the church,
Which is kind of what you typically think of, people coming to church, or in the Old Testament, people going to the temple.
exactly, but instead it was actually going from it. Instead of coming to the church, it was actually going from the church. And so it's like this great vision of the church that's going and being on mission. And where's the water flowing towards? The Dead Sea. And the Dead Sea is called the Dead Sea because the water there's so salty, virtually nothing can live in it. It's actually 8 times saltier than even the ocean, which we call salt water. And I don't know if you remember this, but when we were kids, if we would get sore throats,
Oh, I know where you're going, yeah.
one of the things Mom would do is she'd make us gargle salt water,
If it was the salt water, it was Listerine.
and they're both bad.
Salt water was the worst, though.
And especially that last swig of salt water, because all the salt would sink to the bottom. You'd take that and
It burned like crazy.
it'd burn,
yeah.
but you'd almost choke just getting
Right.
it down. Well, the Dead Sea was that salty. And the water in the Dead Sea is so salty, only a few bacteria can even survive in it. And so the Dead Sea is called the Dead Sea because everything in it is
Dead.
exactly dead. Lastly, though, this water that's flowing from the temple to the Dead Sea, it's getting deeper and deeper and deeper. First, it's ankle deep, then it's knee deep, and then it's waist deep, and then it gets so deep it actually says you could swim in it, and then the water's flowing, and it forms this mighty current, and eventually this huge wave, and I can't even imagine like this tidal wave that flows to the deadest of dead places. And then what transpires next is simply amazing. Those dead places start showing signs of life. And it's not just a little life. I mean, it's vibrant with new life. Ezekiel uses phrases like swarming with life, teeming with life. And there's so much life. The whole Dead Sea turns in this body of fresh, life-giving water. And the fruit trees that are on the banks, they have fruit. But and it's not just a harvest once a year, but it's like every month they bear fruit. And there are leaves on these trees that they says actually have healing powers. And it's just this amazing vision of water that brings life to everything that once was kind of dead and dying.
Yeah, I mean, Dave, what an awesome picture of who God's people, community, is supposed to be, for the next, 25, 50, or 100 years. I mean, this is our part in the story of everything. I mean, our role in the story is to be a life-giving church. I mean, our role isn't just to gather together, but no, to go out and bring new life wherever we go. I mean, when we offer a hand up to someone in poverty, we're giving life. When we help a husband and wife walk through a difficult season, seeking reconciliation, we're giving life. When a student discovers a new group of friends who are also finding their way back to God, like they do like at Blast, right. I mean, we're giving life. When we work with organizations like, Compassion International in Haiti, I mean, we're giving life to one of the most lifeless places in the world.
And community, that is exactly who God wants us to have been and exactly who He wants us to be. And I think it all kind of came together for me when I had somebody ask me the other day, what have been some of the most significant moments in community's brief history? And what occurred to me is the most significant moments have also been life-giving moments. I remember before the church ever started, there was a small group of us that met for what we called discovery meetings. This was like our launch team back in '88. Just a few of us gathered with this dream of a church that would help people find their way back to God. We gathered in the living room of Jay and Patty Jensen's home right here in Naperville. And there were about the same number of people that were in that small group that are in your small group. And I'm telling you, if you ever wonder about the potential of your small group, if you ever wonder about what kind of difference your small group could make, I'm telling you, I know. There is the potential for movement-making kind of potential. These are some of my notes from that meeting 25 years ago. I firmly believe that as we look back on this evening, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, we will remember this evening as the beginning of some tremendous advancements for God's kingdom. It is my prayer that you'll accept the challenge that I believe God's putting before us to be a dynamic and visionary church. God, give us the eyes to see your vision and the heart to make it happen. At that event, we got on our knees and we prayed, asked God to really work through us. And that was a significant moment because God's dream was like coming to life in that small group of people.
Yeah, Dave, and then our first service right here at Naperville Central High School on March 5th, 1989. And again, we prayed and asked God to be at work in and amongst us. And He stunned us and packed this place out. And what I loved about it is most of the people that showed up were not a part of any kind of church before that weekend. And the first message was from Luke chapter 15. I mean, the story of the prodigal son. And we talked about how to find your way back to God. And that was a significant moment because hundreds of people were experiencing new life and finding their way back to God. And then a few years later, one of the highlights, as I recall, was in '98. I remember a leadership community gathering at Lakewood Falls Elementary School over in Romeoville. And we were actually starting another site. We were going to be one church in 2 locations, and nobody was doing that at the time. But again, we prayed, and God was amazing, and hundreds of people showed up for that first service in Romeoville. I mean, only a handful of churches in the country at that time were multi-site, one church in 2 locations. But since then, we've been able to train thousands of church leaders in hundreds of churches across the country, and today there are more than 5,000 multi-site churches in the United States, representing really many of the fastest growing churches in the entire country. And that was a significant moment because, new life was being reproduced in multiple places.
And then if we fast forward about 12 years ago, Dave Richey. Dave was our student community director at the time, and he wanted to go start a brand new church in Colorado. And we told our people, said, hey, if God's sending Dave and his wife, Heather, then he's sending some of you too. And I'll never forget, we had 30, 35 people who sold their homes, got new jobs, transferred schools, and then moved to Denver to start that brand new church. And then in these two churches, we stayed in relationship, we helped each other, and then over time we gave birth to New Thing. And today New Thing has now grown to an international movement of what's now more than 150 reproducing churches. And I look back, that was a significant moment because we were becoming really a movement. And it was just like in Ezekiel's vision. It was kind of like you could feel us kind of flowing everywhere, bringing new life.
And then the next thing I think of is our 20th anniversary, which seems like just a few years ago. And we gathered at all of our locations together on Rotary Hill out here in Naperville. And there were over 7,000 people that came. We had more than 100 people go public and get baptized on that day. We represented locations that we'd started all over Chicagoland. We represented churches that had been started really all over the world at that point. And I just remember that day and in those moments just really feeling overwhelmed by how good God has been to us. And again, that was a significant moment because it was so clear that we were becoming the life-giving church that God dreamed we would become. We were reflecting that vision from Ezekiel. We were clearly having God's favor and God's blessing. And I think it left all of us feeling just tremendously grateful for what God had done and was continuing to do through us.
And in some ways that brings us to today. Each of these stickers up here are significant kind of moments, life-giving moments from someone at Community. These stickers here actually came from one of our leadership communities recently.
I found this one, Dave. It says, left church without my shoes, helped my heart for the less fortunate to grow. Do you remember that Sunday when we asked people to actually leave their shoes at church so that we could give them to people that were in need of shoes? And I thought that was a life-changing week for a lot of people.
What's another one here? How about this one here? This one where it says, God nudging me to be involved with Blast. And I think that's been life-giving for so many people. And then also the wrote, and my baptism.
Yeah. I like this one too. This person writes, how do you choose one? How do you choose one moment? From finding my way back to God, my husband accepting Christ, baptisms, and now joining staff. She writes, God is so good. And he is good. And I think all these circles here represent the many moments and times when God has been really much, much more than just good. Each one of you at your community locations should have one of these circles. And if you don't have it in your hand, I want you to go ahead and pick one up right now. And I want you to hold on to it. But what I want you to do also is begin right now to think of a significant moment for you at Community. Maybe one of the moments that Dave and I read prompted something in your mind. Now, I know most of you haven't been around as long as I have. But when you think about your time at Community, what significant moments or maybe one singular moment stands out most to you? I don't know, maybe it was in a small group, or maybe it was in a celebration service, or maybe it was an opportunity you had to serve in some way. Or maybe a significant moment was when you found your way back to God and went public through baptism, or I don't know, maybe you had the chance to baptize someone who found their way back to God.
I know one of the significant moments that I'll never forget was the very first person who found their way back to God. And the first person was a guy by the name of Steve Martin. And Steve's actually been a part of 5 different kind of campus startups, and today attends our Montgomery campus. And the person who baptized him is an old buddy of ours and college friend who actually was part of the original team that started Community, a guy named Darren Sloniger. Well, they joined us a couple weeks ago at Leadership Community to tell the story of the first person at Community who ever found their way back to God.
So for me, it was like a dream come true to be able to work with John and Dave. I always looked up to John and Dave growing up, and to be part of starting Community Christian was incredible. It was a moment for me that I will always cherish. One of the things that happened early on is we got into this routine of having a staff meeting. So it was me and John and Dave and Scott and Georgia. We'd all get together, and then after the staff meeting, we would all go to Napier Olympic. They converted these 2 racquetball courts into a small basketball court. In the midst of that, we met this guy who was working out all the time there, and we invited him into our game.
They were competitive basketball players. They're very competitive. There were wars started. Never any cussing, but they could play. They were good. But I kept asking myself, who are these guys? It was after one of these heated games that Darren came up to me and said, "Hey, Steve, what are you doing next Sunday?" "I don't know. Why? Why do you ask?" So, me and the boys are starting a new church. It's a Christian church, and why don't you stop by? I'll be one of the guys on stage talking. "You guys are pastors?" No way. I've seen you play basketball. You can't be a pastor. You're too young, and you have fun. Was gonna blow them off, but I figured, well, these guys are my new friends. I'll give them a shot. So this was something new. It was held in a cafeteria at the high school, and in the message, I can't remember who gave it, but it was like it was directed at Steve. It was very pertinent. It wasn't. It was biblically driven, but it involved real life stuff that was going on in my life that I could take out of this, and I listened to every word. So it wasn't too long after that first service that I was asked to join a small group. I said yes, and the more that I dug and the more that I read and the more that I listened, there was more going on in here. And I could tell that to the point where I knew I had to make the public commitment. So I did get baptized. It was a great choice.
Evangelism is not something that comes naturally to me. I'm not an evangelistic person. I'm not out there who's somebody who's kind of preaching it all the time and telling everybody about Jesus. Really, for me, it's born out of having an authentic relationship with somebody where you really care. Like, you give a rip about where that person is going to spend the rest of eternity. And that was really what was happening between Steve and I, is that we were developing a relationship. And naturally, through that relationship, I was able to have the opportunity to talk to him about Jesus. And when that actually worked, we talked about it all the time, but when it actually worked, it was like, wow, that's amazing. It actually does work. It was a fantastic experience.
It was. Hey, thanks again.
Thanks.
I remember coming up out of the water and just, everybody cheering and feeling great. But a couple days later, it's like, bam, I was at work or something, and it's just this overwhelming feeling that I was full. Not full of food, but just full of the Spirit, and God was working in me.
And I think the other thing that's awesome is that Steve's still here, that he's still not only one of the founding people of Community Christian Church, but 25 years later, he's still here. He's active and strong, and that's an awesome testimony to this church and the 25-year history here.
I love it. I just absolutely love it. And 25 years of community, I think, has taught me a lot about significant moments. And I'm convinced the next significant moment as a church that we're going to experience here at Community is going to be next weekend. Next weekend is our 25th anniversary kickoff. We're going to be celebrating all year. And what better way to celebrate 25 years of helping people find their way back to God than seeing people find their way back to God, getting baptized, publicly celebrating their new life in Jesus. I'm praying that more people will get baptized next weekend than any other weekend in the history of Community. I've been asking God, God, let 250 people be baptized. And I know that every campus is prepared. Our whole big idea next weekend is about finding new life in Jesus and giving people the opportunity to go public with their faith in baptism that day. Our campuses, they're going to have baptistries and towels and t-shirts and shorts and I think some cases underwear and blow dryers. They have everything you need to be baptized. It has all the makings of a significant moment. The only thing that's lacking is you. You saying yes to Jesus. For some of you, God has been at work in your life over the last several months, and you know it. You've felt it in amazing ways. And baptism is just clearly your next step in saying yes to Jesus. So I just want to challenge you. Next week, will you just go ahead and, in a bold way, say yes to Jesus? And for others of you, this is something you've been thinking about, but also kind of putting off for a while, just kind of waiting for the right moment. I can't think of a better moment to say yes. Say yes to Jesus. Now, still others of us, maybe you've been baptized. What I want to ask you to do is I want to ask you just to pray and have God bring to mind people who need your encouragement to take that step of being baptized. And as you pray, it might be someone that comes to mind that's in your small group. It might be somebody in your family. It might be a friend. Will you join me in praying that this will be another life-giving, significant moment at Community? And as God brings people to mind, text them, email them, say something to them, encourage them, say, hey, how about next weekend? What we want to do is we want to give you some more information about how you can be a part of this significant moment at your community location. So I'm going to turn this over to your campus pastor or host. And while I do, I just want to say that we are so blessed. I feel so blessed personally to work with some of the best leaders I know anywhere. I mean, men and women who serve as pastors at our community locations all over Chicagoland. And I cannot tell you how proud I am of the work that they're doing throughout the city and throughout the suburbs. So I want you to do me a favor, all right? I want you to do me a favor. Would you join me right now in saying thank you for their leadership as they make their way to the front right now? Let's just hear it for them, all right? Here we go. Welcome them.